A canine police dog rescued a missing officer, found tied up beneath a bridge. The truth behind it will make you cry. This story of canine loyalty reveals the extraordinary bond between an officer and his four-legged partner, under circumstances that challenge our understanding of dedication and instinct. The outcome of this stunning rescue hides details that will touch the human heart. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The wind sliced through the streets of Ash Hollow like invisible blades, making the trees dance to a somber tune. Shadow, the veteran retired German shepherd, raised his pointed ears, catching sounds that human ears would never perceive. His leather collar, worn by time, creaked as he moved restlessly through the small wooden cabin he shared with his owner. Pedro Oliveira slept soundly, wrapped in threadbare blankets, his face etched with time and the loneliness that had accompanied him since his wife's passing. The old man, a former forest firefighter, didn't even notice when the dog nudged the half-open door with his snout and slipped out into the frigid night. The town was submerged in a silence so deep it was as if winter itself had stolen its voice. News of the missing officer circulated in worried whispers, but no one seemed to have any answers. Shadow, however, sensed something different on the air, a call that only his instincts could comprehend. His paws left deep imprints in the snow as he pressed forward with determination. The cold bit through his thick fur, but the old K9 had faced worse conditions in his years of service. Each breath formed small white clouds in the air, dissipating quickly into the darkness. The German shepherd paused for a moment, scenting the wind. His keen eyes scanned the white blanketed landscape, searching for clues invisible to humans. There was something wrong, something that disturbed the natural order of things. The animal felt it in every fiber of his being. A distant rustle, almost imperceptible, caught his attention. Shadow snapped his head toward the high stone bridge, a historic structure that crossed the frozen river at the edge of town. His ears twitched, picking up sounds that told tales of danger and despair. With every step toward the bridge, his paws sank deeper into the snow, making the journey a challenge. But Shadow pushed on, guided by an instinct as ancient as the bond between men and dogs. The instinct to protect, to save, to find. The full moon partially lit his path, casting long shadows between the trees. A growing certainty settled upon him that something terrible was hidden beneath that bridge. It wasn't just the missing officer. It was something deeper, more sinister, something that threatened the peace of all of Ash Hollow. Shadow continued his advance through the snow, determined to follow a trail that only he could perceive. The town slept on, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the shadows. But the old dog knew that before dawn, the truth hidden under the high stone bridge would forever change everyone's fate. Pedro Oliveira awoke with a jolt, his stiff body protesting the sudden movement. The rocking chair where he'd fallen asleep was still swaying gently, but the empty space by the hearth made his heart clench. Shadow was gone. The silence of the cabin seemed amplified by the absence of the German shepherd's deep sighs and occasional soft snores. "Shadow?" he called, his voice cracking the silence like splintering glass. The former firefighter walked to the back door, checking if the dog had simply gone out for his nightly business, but he found no recent tracks in the snow. Only old prints already partially covered by the fresh downfall. Something was wrong. In their 15 years together, the dog had never disappeared like this, especially on such a harsh night. The photograph of his late wife on the mantelpiece seemed to watch him with worried eyes. It had only been 6 months since Maria had passed, taking with her so much of the light that brightened his days. Since then, Shadow had become not just a companion, but his anchor to reality, the only reason to get up each morning. "I'll find him. Don't you worry," he murmured to the portrait, as if she could hear his promise. Pedro pulled on his thickest coat, wrapped a scarf around his neck, and put on his waterproof boots. Something inside him, a dormant instinct from his time in the fire brigade, was stirring to life. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the biting night, determined to find his faithful friend. Meanwhile, on the other side of Ash Hollow, the police station was a hive of tense activity, despite the late hour. Detective Maria Lima, the officer in charge of the case, spread maps across the central table while adjusting the volume on an old radio. The worry lines on her face reflected the gravity of the situation. 48 hours is too long," she said, marking the last places Officer João Santos had been seen with a red circle. This wasn't just another missing persons case. João was beloved in the small community, known for helping the elderly cross the street and organizing fundraisers for the local animal shelter. His absence created a vacuum that seemed to suck the hope from everyone. "The volunteers are ready to resume the search at dawn," one of the officers reported, rubbing his hands together against the cold. Maria nodded, her eyes fixed on the map. In a small town like Ash Hollow, where everyone knew each other by name, the disappearance of one of their own was like an open wound. Every minute that passed without news was a painful reminder that something terrible could have happened. "We're not giving up," she stated, her voice firm and echoing in the quiet room. "João would do the same for any one of us." The cutting wind howled through the pines as Shadow sniffed the frozen ground. His paws sank into the deep snow, but the German shepherd kept his nose low, picking up scents that humans could never perceive. Every smell was a story, every odor a clue to the whereabouts of João Santos. The veteran K9 knew he couldn't fail, not when a life depended on his persistence. Suddenly, a faint, metallic clink cut through the moan of the wind. Shadow froze, still as a statue, his ears pricked. The sound of metal on stone came again. It was subtle, but to the dog's heightened senses, it was a desperate call. The German shepherd changed direction, abandoning the main trail. His instincts guided him down a nearly invisible path where the snow had drifted into treacherous mounds. The further he went, the heavier the atmosphere became, as if the air itself was thick with fear. Shadow could feel it. Something terrible had happened here. After a 20-minute trek, an abandoned shed emerged from between the trees. The wooden structure, battered by decades of harsh winters, looked as if it were about to collapse. Shadow hesitated at the entrance, sniffing the stale air. The smell of mold mingled with something more recent, human presence. Inside the shed, the darkness was almost absolute. The dog advanced cautiously, his paws causing the rotted floorboards to groan in protest. In the farthest corner, an object was emitting an intermittent static. Shadow approached, recognizing an old radio similar to the ones he'd seen at the Ash Hollow police station. The device was partially covered by a dusty tarp. With his snout, the dog pushed the fabric aside, revealing the radio completely. The static grew louder, and for a fleeting moment, a human voice cut through. It was weak, broken, but unmistakably a plea for help. Shadow pressed the side button with his paw, just as he had been taught in his training days. The radio hissed, and then a broken message cut through the static. "Under the bridge, tied up, water rising, Help. It was a partial code, but it was enough. The officer was alive, trapped somewhere under the high stone bridge, where only a dog with Shadow's exceptional sense of smell could find him. The German shepherd let out a single bark, as if answering the call, and then bolted out of the shed. The snow was falling harder now, but nothing would stop him. He had found the crucial clue, one that no human could have deciphered. The life of João Santos depended on how fast Shadow could reach the bridge and find the officer before it was too late. João Santos felt the cold seep into his very bones as he remained tied beneath the planks of the high stone bridge. His wrists burned against the coarse ropes, and every attempt to free himself only tightened the knots. The officer tried to control his breathing, conserving energy as he watched the darkness around him deepen with the falling night. "Someone will find me," he muttered to himself, trying to push away the despair that threatened to overwhelm him. The sound of the water rushing beneath the bridge seemed to mock his predicament, while the wind howled through the cracks in the old planks. João had noticed a suspicious pattern in the smuggler's movements weeks earlier, but he had never imagined his investigation would lead to this. His thoughts were interrupted by a distant sound. Was it just the wind, or something more? The officer held his breath, straining to distinguish any sound that might mean rescue. A single tear traced a path down his face as hope battled against the cold that was numbing his body. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Pedro Oliveira trudged through the snow, following Shadow's fresh tracks. The old man pulled his coat tighter, shielding himself from the biting wind. His years as a forest firefighter had taught him how to read a trail, and something about his dog's behavior intrigued him deeply. "Where are you, old friend?" Pedro murmured, as his tired eyes followed the prints in the snow leading to the abandoned shed. The retiree's heart hammered in his chest when he saw the dilapidated structure in the distance. Upon entering the shed, Pedro was met by the intermittent static of an old radio. The device seemed to have been activated recently. Approaching with caution, he noticed something else. Dark tufts of Shadow's fur scattered near the radio. The unmistakable scent of his canine companion mixed with the odor of rust and damp wood. Pedro crouched with difficulty, examining the floor. There were paw prints leading toward the back door. His gut told him that Shadow had found something, or someone. The dog's absence from the shed meant he was continuing his search. "You're on the right trail, aren't you, boy?" he whispered. Feeling a mixture of pride and concern, the former firefighter knew his faithful companion would never give up on a lead. With renewed determination, Pedro followed the new set of tracks leading out of the shed and towards the high stone bridge. As the sky darkened and the first flakes of snow began to fall once more, the biting wind made every one of Shadow's steps a challenge. The veteran German shepherd faced the icy embankment with the same determination that had made him a K9 legend. His paws slipped on the packed snow as he tried to find a foothold on the treacherous slope. Below, the ravine opened like a hungry mouth, ready to swallow him at the slightest misstep. Shadow advanced inch by inch, his claws scratching at the ice, searching for purchase. The weight of his years pressed down on his tired muscles, but the memory of Officer Santos's scent remained vivid in his sensitive nose. A dry branch hidden beneath the snow suddenly snapped under his paws. The dog felt his body slide dangerously toward the abyss. For one terrible moment, Shadow hung over the void, his heart racing as his hind legs desperately scrabbled for any kind of hold. It was his survival instinct, the very one Pedro Oliveira had always admired, that made him throw his body to the side, finding a small, rocky ledge that broke his fall. Panting, the animal remained motionless for a few seconds. The cold was seeping through his thick fur, but something stronger drove him on. The memory of the missing officer's scent and the certainty that he was still alive somewhere nearby. When he finally reached the top, Shadow felt the first drops of icy rain. The sky was darkening rapidly, heralding the storm everyone in town had been dreading. Lightning tore through the heavy clouds, briefly illuminating the imposing structure of the high stone bridge, which rose like a phantom against the tumultuous sky. The old dog hesitated. His instincts screamed of danger, but duty spoke louder. Every step onto the ancient planks of the bridge was a gamble. The wood groaned in protest under his weight, and the wind howled through the rusted metal framework, as if trying to push him back. Shadow advanced cautiously, his ears pricked to catch sounds that no human could. That's when a different sound reached him. Faint, almost inaudible beneath the roar of the storm. It was a human cry, a plea for help. João Santos was alive. The officer, tied up beneath the bridge, was fighting against the cold and the despair. That sound, however weak, hit Shadow like an electric shock. The fear that had been freezing his bones gave way to a fierce determination. The German shepherd quickened his pace, ignoring the danger of the loose planks and the wind that threatened to knock him over. With every step he took across the trembling bridge, Shadow knew he was closer to completing his mission. He was not just a dog following a trail. He was a hero answering the call of duty. Back at the Ash Hollow police station, the tension was mounting. Maria Lima paced relentlessly, her eyes fixed on the monitors displaying grainy drone footage. The detective adjusted her radio for the third time, straining to catch any signal from the trackers scattered across the region. "Are we really betting our chips on an old dog?" she questioned, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "We have technology, state-of-the-art equipment, and you want to trust the nose of a retired German shepherd." Pedro Oliveira, sitting in a corner of the room, his wrinkled hands cupped around a coffee mug, raised his weary gaze. His slumped shoulders carried the weight of his worry for Shadow, but his voice was steady when he replied, "That dog has saved more lives than all your gadgets combined, Detective. Shadow knows this forest. He knows the scent of fear and the scent of hope. He will find João." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few of the younger officers exchanged skeptical glances, while the veterans nodded in silent agreement. One of them walked over to Pedro and squeezed his shoulder in solidarity. "The drones can't penetrate the area by the bridge in this blizzard," a technician admitted, switching off one of the monitors. "Visibility is near zero." Meanwhile, beneath the high stone bridge, Shadow was braving the fury of winter. Slicing winds whipped at his fur, forming tiny ice crystals around his alert ears. The gusts, like invisible knives, nearly blocked access to the lower beams. But the German shepherd refused to leave. Each step was a battle against the wind and the cold, but he pressed on, guided by the faint scent of Officer João Santos and the almost imperceptible sound of his breathing. When he finally reached the officer, Shadow found a man on the brink of unconsciousness. João's lips were blue, his body racked with violent shivers, the ropes binding him cut into skin already raw from the cold. Shadow lay down beside him, pressing his thick coat against the soaked uniform. He licked João's face, trying to coax a reaction. The dog's warmth was a small bonfire in the freezing darkness under the bridge. "Shadow," João murmured, his voice nearly lost in the howl of the wind. "You came." The dog answered with a low whine, nestling even closer. With every passing minute, the temperature dropped, but Shadow remained steadfast, a living shield against the hypothermia threatening to consume the officer. Back at the precinct, the radio suddenly crackled to life. Every head turned toward the device as Maria Lima approached, a look of astonishment spreading across her face. Clara Souza burst in, breathless, a heavy backpack slung over her shoulders. The veterinarian hadn't been officially called, but something inside her, perhaps the painful memory of Valente, her own canine partner, lost during a rescue 3 years ago, had spurred her to follow the tracks in the snow. Her eyes, trained to identify signs of animal distress, immediately saw the exhaustion in Shadow's paws. "I brought a few things that might help," she said, pulling thermal blankets and flashlights from her pack. Her movements were precise, the result of years spent responding to animal emergencies. Shadow approached her, recognizing an ally. The shepherd was trembling slightly, but held his ground beside the bound officer. Clara wrapped João Santos in one of the blankets, quickly assessing his vital signs. His body temperature was dangerously low, his lips a worrying shade of blue. "We need to get him out of here fast," the vet murmured, applying basic techniques to warm him. "The hypothermia is advanced." Pedro Oliveira watched, feeling helpless. "How much time do we have?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "A few hours, maybe," Clara replied, her attention fixed on her patient. "Every minute counts now." It was then that Shadow began to act strangely. He moved away from the group and barked insistently toward the embankment, his gaze darting between Clara and Joao's boots. His barks had a different tone, not of alarm, but of communication. "He's trying to show us something," Pedro said, recognizing his faithful companion's behavior. Clara followed Shadow to the spot he indicated. The dog sniffed insistently at the officer's right boot. Carefully, the veterinarian examined the footwear and discovered a hidden compartment in the sole. Inside, protected by a waterproof casing, was a small pen drive. "My God!" she exclaimed, showing the device to Pedro. "This must be crucial information for the case." Shadow barked again, as if to confirm the discovery. His eyes, though weary, shone with determination. The dog had not only found the officer, but also the evidence that could unravel the entire mystery behind his kidnapping. Clara carefully pocketed the drive and turned her attention back to João, who was muttering incoherently. She knew they had to move quickly, both to save the officer and to protect the information Shadow had helped them find. The storm raged mercilessly, turning the path back into a brutal challenge. Shadow, determination in his tired eyes, guided Clara Souza up the slippery embankment. The wind howled through the trees, hurling snow against their faces, but the German shepherd remained focused, as if he understood the vital importance of the small device they had just recovered. "Come on, boy. We're almost there," the vet murmured, clinging to exposed roots as she climbed. Her gloved hands, already soaked, held tightly to the pen drive. With every step, Clara felt the weight of responsibility. That tiny object could mean not just the officer's salvation, but the exposure of a criminal network that had been terrorizing Ash Hollow for months. Reaching the top, Shadow shook the snow from his drenched fur. Clara tucked the device into an inner pocket of her coat, shielding it from the elements. "You're incredible," she whispered, giving the dog a brief, grateful hug before they pushed on toward the precinct. In the main room of the police department, the tension was palpable. Pedro Oliveira waited anxiously, his fingers drumming on the worn wooden table. When the door swung open to reveal Clara and Shadow, every eye turned to them. "We found something," the veterinarian announced, pulling the pen drive from her coat. It was hidden in his boot. Maria Lima hesitantly extended her hand. The detective, known for her reliance on technology, stared at the device with a mixture of surprise and respect. How did a retired dog find what our drones couldn't? She muttered, plugging the drive into her computer. The screen cast a blue glow on their faces, revealing detailed files, smuggling routes, names of accomplices, operation dates. Shadow, lying at Pedro's feet, watched the activity with keen eyes, as if he understood the gravity of his discovery. My God, one of the officers exclaimed. This explains why they took João. He was tracking their entire operation. Maria's expression softened. She looked at Shadow, who rested, exhausted but vigilant. It seems I owe you and your partner an apology, she said, turning to Pedro. This old warrior may have just saved our entire investigation. As the team pored over the documents, rapidly organizing a rescue operation, Pedro gently stroked Shadow's head. The clock on the wall ticked on relentlessly. Every minute meant less of a chance for João Santos, still trapped under the high stone bridge, fighting the cold and his injuries. We're going to bring him back, Clara promised, kneeling beside the dog. Thanks to you, Shadow. Thanks to you. The data from the drive projected coordinates and the smugglers' escape routes onto the station's main screen. Maria Lima, her earlier reluctance gone, swiftly organized a rescue team. Pedro, his eyes glistening with pride, fastened a reinforced collar around Shadow's neck, while Clara attached a small, makeshift flare to the dog's back. He knows the way better than any of us, Pedro murmured, ruffling the German shepherd's fur. Snow had completely covered the trails by the time the group set out. Shadow took the lead, his nose to the icy air. The veteran K9 instinctively veered around camouflaged snares, ropes stretched taut between trees and shallow pits covered with branches. After clearing each obstacle, he would glance back, ensuring the team followed safely. It's incredible how he detects these traps, Clara remarked, her admiration for the dog growing with every step. After nearly an hour, they reached the base of the high stone bridge. The wind howled through its rusted metal structures, a ghostly lament echoing through the valley. Shadow stopped abruptly, his ears pricked in alert. Seconds later, one of the old bridge lamps tore loose with a metallic screech. Look out! João Santos's voice crackled over the radio from the station. Pedro shoved Clara aside just as the heavy lamp crashed to the ground, less than a yard from where they had been standing, sending shards of glass and metal skittering across the snow. In the ensuing chaos, the team scattered, disoriented by the near tragedy. Shadow began barking insistently, running between the team members to herd them back together. He then led them toward the side of an abandoned shed where the wood seemed less rotted. Pedro pulled a multi-tool from his worn coat pocket and, with hands trembling from the cold, began prying at the boards. He wants us to go in here, he explained, forcing an opening. One by one, they slipped inside the makeshift shelter. It was dry and relatively shielded from the biting wind. Clara switched on a flashlight, revealing recent footprints in the dust, a sign the criminals had used this very spot as an observation post. Shadow didn't just save us from the falling lamp, she observed. He led us to a place that might hold more clues. Pedro smiled with pride. This wasn't just a dog. He was a hero who continued to defy all expectations. Suddenly, Shadow froze in the snow, his ears twitching as they caught a scent he hadn't encountered in years. The retired shepherd stood motionless, his muzzle pointed toward the darkness between the trees. It wasn't just the scent of another dog. It was Thunder, his old training partner from the Kamavi unit. Hesitation seized the old dog. Thunder had vanished 2 winters ago, during a mission gone wrong. Now his scent was mingled with that of the smugglers, the very people holding João Santos captive. A low growl rumbled in his throat as he processed the betrayal. Pedro noticed the change in his companion's demeanor. The old handler knelt beside him. "What is it, boy? What do you smell?" he whispered, running a wrinkled hand over Shadow's graying fur. The veteran dog was torn. A part of him wanted to retreat, to avoid a confrontation with an old friend. But then, a gust of wind brought the faint scent of João, mixed with the metallic odor of blood and the damp rot of the wood beneath the bridge. The image of the bound, suffering officer flooded his mind. Clara approached with a flashlight. "He sensed something," she said. "Maybe another dog." Shadow looked from Pedro to Clara, then toward the path ahead. With renewed determination, he pushed forward through the snow, leaving his hesitation behind. Duty spoke louder than any loyalty of the past. Meanwhile, under the frozen planks of the bridge, João Santos fought to stay conscious. The cold had seeped into his bones, making each breath an act of defiance. His wrists, bound with rough rope, had gone numb hours ago. Suddenly, a distant sound cut through the silence. The officer forced his swollen eyes open, trying to distinguish reality from hallucination. It was the distinct crunch of improvised sleds on packed snow, accompanied by human voices and, could it be, barking. An unexpected warmth spread through Joao's chest. It wasn't the physical heat his body desperately craved, but something deeper: hope. Even as ice formed on his soaked clothes and consciousness slipped away like water through his fingers, he clung to that feeling. "I'm here," he tried to shout, but his voice was only a hoarse whisper. "Please, I'm down here." The officer closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his last vestiges of strength. Out there in the frozen darkness of Ash Hollow, Shadow was moving forward, leaving the ghosts of his past behind him, just as he always had. Mercenaries emerged from the shadows like ghosts in the snow. Camouflaged traps exploded less than 2 meters from the rescue team, their flashes momentarily blinding Pedro and Detective Lima. The group was forced to retreat behind a rock formation as the criminals advanced with makeshift weapons. Shadow, his fur bristling and his senses on high alert, caught a different scent on the air. While the humans scrambled to form a strategy, the German shepherd slipped away silently, his nose to the frozen ground. His experienced paws scouted out a narrow passage between the rocks, a path the smugglers had never known. "Shadow's gone," Pedro exclaimed, his heart tight with worry. But before they could even begin a search, the veteran dog reappeared, barking insistently and running in circles, a behavior his owner recognized at once. "He's found something," Pedro explained to the others. "He wants us to follow." Clara Souza was the first to heed the dog's instinct. The veterinarian followed Shadow through the tight opening in the rocks, forced to crawl through certain stretches. The others came right behind, while the criminals, completely deceived, continued their watch over the main trail. The alternative path was steep and treacherous. Maria Lima, initially skeptical, now watched in admiration as the old dog carefully chose each step, avoiding unstable ground and guiding the group with surprising precision. "The cedar lanterns," one of the volunteers whispered, pulling small, handcrafted artifacts from his pack. "It's New Year's Eve." They lit the traditional lanterns, their soft glow illuminating the way without drawing unwanted attention. The amber light danced among the falling snowflakes, creating a scene of almost magical beauty amidst the danger. Shadow stopped abruptly. His ears pricked. A familiar scent hung in the air. Apple pie. It drifted from a distant cabin, where an unsuspecting family was celebrating the holiday. The aroma stirred in them all a wave of nostalgia and renewed determination. We're bypassing the smugglers, Maria realized, consulting the makeshift map on her device. Shadow has led us along a path that puts us right behind them. The group moved forward in silence, guided by the cedar lanterns and the dog's unerring intuition. When they finally reached a clearing that offered a perfect view of the criminal's hideout, Pedro couldn't hold back tears of pride. "You doubted him," he said softly, stroking Shadow's fur. "But he always knew what to do." The team quickly regrouped. With the element of surprise on their side, they now had a real chance to rescue João Santos and dismantle the entire criminal operation. Shadow, at the head of the group, seemed rejuvenated by the mission, ready to complete the rescue he had started alone. The biting wind subsided as the team finally reached the base of the high stone bridge. Pedro Oliveira, his hands trembling from both cold and emotion, drew his multi-tool from the pocket of his worn coat. His years as a forest firefighter had taught him never to leave home without the small device, which might now save a life. Shadow did not wait. While Pedro worked on the rotten planks, the dog began to dig frantically in the accumulated snow, his powerful paws tearing away layers of ice with unshakable resolve. His sensitive snout picked up the scent of João Santos, growing stronger, mingled with the odor of damp wood and rusted metal. "He's found something!" cried Clara Souza, kneeling beside the animal. The veterinarian, who had brought thermal blankets in her pack, watched the dog's every move. With a sharp crack, Pedro managed to pry loose the first plank. Shadow barked as if in approval and continued to dig with even greater vigor. The snow, mixed with earth, gradually revealed a narrow opening, the secret entrance where the officer was imprisoned. "João, we're here!" Pedro called out, his voice thick with emotion. A weak groan answered from the darkness within. Shadow was the first to slip inside, sliding through the tight space with an agility surprising for a dog of his age. Seconds later, they heard confirmatory barks. Clara and Pedro widened the opening, and with the help of two volunteers, they were finally able to reach João Santos. The officer was pale, his lips blue from the cold, but his eyes lit up as he saw Shadow licking his face, as if to warm him with his own body heat. "You came," João murmured, extending a trembling hand to stroke the dog's fur. Carefully, they wrapped the officer in thermal blankets and pulled him from the hideout. Outside, news of the rescue spread quickly. Residents of Ash Hollow began to arrive, bringing thermoses of hot tea and freshly baked apple pies. The sweet aroma mingled with the frigid air, creating an atmosphere of comfort amidst the winter desolation. The community formed a protective circle around the rescued and his rescuers. Shadow remained glued to Joao's side, refusing to leave him, even when offered water and food for himself. Maria Lima, who had been coordinating the operation by radio, arrived out of breath. Seeing the scene, she could no longer hold back the tears she had suppressed for days. The detective, always so rational, knelt in the snow and hugged Shadow, whispering words of gratitude that only the animal could hear. In that moment, under a sky just beginning to lighten, there was no distinction between human and animal. Only hearts warmed by the certainty that together they had overcome the impossible. The news spread through Ash Hollow like wildfire. João Santos had been found, But what the flash drive revealed left everyone stunned. Deputy Marcos Pereira, a man respected by all for 15 years, was the leader of the smuggling ring operating in the region. The evidence was irrefutable. Payment logs, shipment dates, and escape routes, all meticulously documented by the officer before he was discovered and abducted. At the station, the atmosphere was one of dismay. Maria Lima gathered the entire team to announce the arrest of their corrupt colleague. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the documents, but her voice remained firm. We trusted him for all these years. He came to our holiday parties. He knew our families, the detective said, as the other officers lowered their gaze, ashamed they had never seen the signs. Meanwhile, at Pedro Oliveira's cabin, João was slowly recovering. Clara Souza visited daily, bringing not only medicine for João, but also special treats for Shadow. The German Shepherd rarely left the officer's bedside, as if still standing guard against invisible dangers. He saved my life twice, João murmured, stroking the dog's ears. First when he found me, then when he kept my body warm until help arrived. The veterinarian smiled, applying ointment to Shadow's injured paws. There was an unspoken understanding between her and the officer, a mutual recognition that grew with each visit. Pedro noticed the glances they exchanged and smiled discreetly as he prepared tea in the kitchen. The townspeople, initially shaken by the betrayal of someone so respected, found in Shadow's story a symbol of hope. Daily, baskets of homemade food, hand-knitted blankets, and thank you cards arrived at the cabin door. An elderly woman even knitted a special vest for the dog in the colors of the local flag. Clara, examining João's wounds, which were healing well, remarked, I think you've started a movement in this town. People are talking about forming an animal protection association, inspired by Shadow. The officer smiled faintly, his body still sore. It wasn't me. It was him, he replied, nodding toward the dog resting by his bed. I always knew there was something special about this old warrior. At night, when everyone else slept, Shadow remained alert, his watchful eyes fixed on the window. The betrayal had been uncovered, but his instinct told him the story was not quite over. The successful rescue of João Santos had transformed Pedro Oliveira. The former forest firefighter, who had closed himself off from the world after his wife's death, felt a spark of purpose rekindle in his chest. One clear morning, Pedro picked up his old phone and began calling comrades he hadn't spoken to in years. We need to protect our town, just like we did in our youth, he said, gathering 5 former firefighters at the Central Square Cafe. The group, their hair now streaked with gray and their faces lined by time, discussed how to organize volunteer patrols to supplement the work of the local police. Shadow lay beside the table, listening to every word, as if he understood the gravity of the moment. Within days, the patrols began. Equipped with radios and flashlights, the volunteers covered remote areas of Ash Hollow, especially near the High Stone Bridge. What started with 5 men soon grew into a team of 20 volunteers of all ages. Teenagers joined the elderly, learning tracking and first aid techniques that Pedro taught with renewed patience. Shadow showed us we're never too old to make a difference, Pedro commented during one training session, as the German Shepherd proudly watched the new recruits. At the police station, Maria Lima was undergoing her own transformation. The detective, known for her unshakable faith in technology, called an extraordinary meeting with her entire team. With her usual rigid posture but a new light in her eyes, she surprised them all. Our devices failed where a dog's instinct triumphed, Maria declared, pointing to a map of the region. As of today, we will be reactivating the K9 program in Ash Hollow. The decision was met with enthusiastic applause. Two young officers were immediately assigned to begin specialized canine training. Clara Souza, the veterinarian, offered her technical support to the program, bringing her experience with rescue animals. In a simple but moving ceremony, Shadow received an honorary badge, which was fastened to his collar. The dog, though old, held an upright, proud posture as Maria placed the symbol around his neck. This dog has taught us that true security comes from the union of technology and instinct, of youth and experience, the detective said, finally letting the mask of professional coolness she had always maintained fall away. Ash Hollow, once dormant in its routine, now pulsed with a new sense of community. Pedro's patrols and Maria's K9 program symbolized more than just safety. They represented a bridge between generations and methods, much like the high stone bridge itself now linked the small town's past and future. The first flowers of spring were beginning to bloom in Ash Hollow, bringing colors that contrasted with the still fresh memory of the harsh winter. João Santos, now recovered from his abduction, walked slowly through the central square beside Clara Souza. The officer still limped slightly, but his face had regained the liveliness that had defined him before the incident. "I never had the chance to tell you," João said, stopping beneath the shade of a flowering tree. "5 years ago, when there was that fire at the veterinary lab, I was the officer on duty." Clara froze. That fire had nearly cost her her life. Someone had rescued her, but she had never known who. She looked at the officer, her eyes welling with tears, finally understanding the sense of familiarity she had felt from the very first moment. "That was you? But why did you never say anything?" "Some acts don't need recognition," he replied, gently touching her arm, "just like what Shadow did for me." The look they shared said more than any words could, a silent bond of gratitude and affection that was now blossoming like the cherry trees around them. Spring, it seemed, was bringing renewal not only to nature, but to their hearts as well. Meanwhile, at Pedro Oliveira's cabin, Shadow was basking in his newfound fame. The German shepherd, lying comfortably on his new padded bed, a gift from grateful townspeople, received daily visits from the neighborhood children. They brought him homemade treats, toys, and most importantly, endless affection for the four-legged hero. "Easy with his ears, Miguel," Pedro would guide an 8-year-old boy who was enthusiastically petting the dog. "Shadow may be a hero, but he's also an old man who needs a gentle touch." The retiree watched the scene with a smile that hadn't graced his face in a long time. Since losing his wife, his cabin had become a place of silence and memories. Now, filled with the laughter of children and the occasional bark from Shadow, his home was once again pulsing with life and joy. Maria Lima, stopping by to check on the dog, couldn't help but notice the transformation in the old man's face. "It seems Shadow didn't just save João," the detective commented, accepting a cup of tea from Pedro. "He brought life back to a lot of people in this town." Pedro nodded, watching his faithful companion, surrounded by his young admirers. Spring in Ash Hollow had never seemed so full of promise. The aroma of freshly baked apple pies drifted over Ash Hollow's central square, mingling with the sounds of laughter and lively conversation. The annual festival, which once seemed like just another bland tradition, now held a special significance. Colorful banners fluttered in the spring breeze as residents gathered around the small, makeshift stage. Pedro Oliveira nervously adjusted the special collar he had bought for the occasion. Beside him, João Santos smiled, a few bruises still visible, but his eyes shining with gratitude. The ex-firefighter felt a lump in his throat when the mayor called his name, and shadows. Please welcome Pedro Oliveira and our four-legged hero. The German shepherd advanced with a steady gait, his advanced age belying his confident posture. His ears were pricked, attentive, as if he understood the importance of the moment. The crowd parted for him, children pointing and whispering in admiration. Clara Souza watched from the front row, her eyes glistening. The veterinarian had spent the entire morning brushing Shadow's coat, ensuring he looked his absolute best for his moment of honor. By her side, Maria Lima tried to maintain a professional demeanor, but her smile betrayed the emotion she held in check. This extraordinary animal, the mayor began, holding up a small golden medal, has taught us that courage knows no species, no age, no limitations. As the speech continued, Pedro remembered the lonely nights after losing his wife, when only the warmth of shadow by the fireplace kept him from succumbing to his grief. Now, looking out at the crowded square, he realized he would never be alone again. The mayor knelt and clipped the medal onto Shadow's collar. The dog stood with quiet dignity, as if he understood the solemnity of the moment. A wave of applause erupted, followed by whistles and shouts of, "Long live Shadow!" A few children released small, colorful balloons that danced against the blue sky. João Santos approached the microphone, his voice still hoarse from his ordeal under the bridge. When I was losing hope, it was this friend's bark that brought me back. He didn't just save my life. He saved the spirit of all of Ash Hollow. An elderly woman in the crowd couldn't hold back her tears. Others followed her lead, and soon there was a sea of smiling, weeping faces. Pedro knelt beside Shadow and whispered words of pride into his ear. Clara joined them on the stage, carrying a tray of special treats for the canine hero. The entire town cheered as Shadow, with all his dignity, accepted his reward. In that moment, under the gentle spring sun, Ash Hollow was reborn. The cruel winter was behind them, and with it, the isolation that had frozen the hearts of its residents for so long. Shadow, the unlikely hero, had melted more than just the snow. He had restored their faith in kindness and the connection between all living things. In the seasons that followed, under the shade of a leafy tree in Ash Hollow's central square, Pedro Oliveira and Clara Souza watched Shadow resting on the grass, his graying coat a testament to his years of service. The old German shepherd rested peacefully, but his watchful eyes still followed the movements of children playing nearby. He doesn't show it, but I can tell his joints are bothering him more, Clara commented, adjusting her glasses as she analyzed the dog's subtle movements. Age is relentless, even for heroes. Pedro ran a wrinkled hand over his companion's fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of the animal who had filled the void his wife had left behind. Do you think we should shorten our morning walks? The veterinarian smiled tenderly. On the contrary, the movement is good for him. We just need to adapt the routes. Shadow would never accept being idle. It would break his spirit. As they spoke, the dog's ears to sears perked up, sensing the approach of João Santos, who crossed the square with a confident stride. The police officer, now fully recovered, carried a folder and was wearing his full uniform for the first time since the incident. Good to see you back in service, Pedro greeted him, noting the renewed posture of the man Shadow had found beneath the bridge. João crouched to pet the German shepherd, who licked his hand in recognition. I owe my life to this warrior, and to you both. Clara watched the interaction with misty eyes. How is it, being back at the station? Different, the officer replied. I'm organizing a volunteer training program. I want everyone to know how to act in emergencies, especially during the winter. Shadow rose, walking with dignity despite a slight limp in his hind leg. The veteran K9 positioned himself between the three humans, as if understanding every word. He'll always be a guardian, no matter his age, Pedro observed, his voice thick with pride. João nodded, placing a hand on the old man's shoulder. Maria Lima has approved the creation of a new K9 squad at the station, João said, looking at Pedro. I'd like you to help us with the training. Your experience with Shadow would be invaluable. The former forest ranger's eyes lit up with renewed purpose. It would be an honor. Clara smiled, seeing how Shadow had not only saved one life, but had rebuilt several. The old dog, sensing the special moment, sat tall as he had in his service days, proving that even with age, his spirit remained unbreakable. The sun began to set over Ash Hollow, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, as the four of them shared a moment of silent gratitude for the new, intertwined chapter of their lives. As night fell softly over the town, Shadow, with slow but determined steps, made his way to the high stone bridge. The old German shepherd, now a celebrated hero, moved with the quiet dignity of one who carries stories in his gaze. The bridge, once a symbol of danger and despair, had been fully restored. Its pillars were reinforced, and the deck was renewed with treated wood that no longer creaked beneath his paws. Cedar lanterns, newly installed, cast a golden corridor of light that reflected in the dog's aging fur. Shadow sat at the exact spot where, months before, he had caught the first scent of the missing officer. He lifted his muzzle, taking in the sweet aroma of the first spring blossoms, mixed with the damp scent of the river below. He seemed to understand the place's transformation, from a scene of terror to a monument of hope. Pedro Oliveira watched his faithful companion from a distance, a tightness in his chest as he saw the dog's silhouette against the starry sky. He approached slowly, his footsteps echoing lightly on the new planks. Shadow didn't turn, but his ears twitched, acknowledging his master's familiar presence. You always come back here, don't you, boy? Pedro murmured, kneeling carefully beside the dog. His wrinkled hands stroked the shepherd's fur, finding the small scars left from that winter's adventure. You saved more than one life that day. The old man leaned against the railing, feeling the weight of the years on his knees, but a lightness in his heart he hadn't felt for a long time. Thank you, old friend, Pedro whispered, resting his forehead against the dog's muzzle. For bringing me back to life, too. The bond between them, forged in the lonely nights after his wife's passing, and tempered in the icy rescue, now glowed under the cedar lanterns. It was a connection that transcended words, warming even the most forgotten hearts of the small town. The last of the snow melted on the hillsides, giving way to a carpet of wildflowers. As the warmth settled in, the scars of that brutal winter began to heal, not just on the landscape, but in the souls of the people of Ash Hollow. The town's traditions evolved. The cedar lanterns, once lit only on New Year's Eve, now illuminated the town on any special occasion, symbolizing the light Shadow had brought into the darkness. At community festivals, an evening ritual began. A moment of silence. All eyes turned toward the high stone bridge, a shared prayer of thanks for the unity that had saved one of their own. At the school, children learned how a single animal had altered the destiny of an entire town. João Santos, fully recovered, often visited with Shadow to tell their story. Sometimes, he would tell the wide-eyed students, Hope has four paws and a wet nose. On the last day of spring, a golden light bathed the central square. João, Pedro, Clara, and Maria gathered under the great tree. Shadow rested on the cool grass as they showered him with affection. I never thought I'd be here, thanking a dog for my life, João confessed, his voice catching as he remembered the despair under the bridge. Pedro smiled, his eyes reflecting memories of lonely days now long past. Shadow taught me it's never too late to start over. I thought I'd be alone forever, but he brought me all of you. Clara adjusted a new red collar on Shadow, a gift from the community. He didn't just save a life, she murmured. He rekindled hope in all of us. Maria, who had once doubted traditional methods, now bowed to the wisdom of the old dog. Sometimes we have to look to the past to find the solutions for the future, she admitted, placing a small replica of a police badge beside him. Shadow rose slowly, his old body weary but his eyes bright with loyalty. He looked toward the renewed bridge in the distance, a silent guardian recalling his journey. Ash Hollow had learned that true strength doesn't always come from new technology or clever strategies. Sometimes it hides in a loyal gaze and the unwavering hope that can survive even under the darkest of bridges. The spirit of Shadow had become the spirit of the town itself, a lasting reminder that courage and compassion can bloom in the most unexpected of places.